K, Nick.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to talk The Shining today. I got to watch the film first, but I love the book so much. It's going to be just like the book. So, I mean, I can't wait for a literal line-by-line translation of this book.
You're not going to get it.
What? Hey, once again, welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatheFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, and thanks again for watching. Thanks again for finding us, and for our loyal fans, thank you. Continue to support the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. Today, we're going to talk about one of the great winter horror movies of all time, The Shining.
Yes. So when Jack Torrance is hired as a winter caretaker for the Overlook Hotel, he brings his wife and child to the secluded hotel to stay with him for the season. A recovering alcoholic with a nasty case of writer's block, Jack is plagued by cabin fever and a sinister presence pushing him into violent territory and a seeming aggression toward little Danny Torrance, who has a gift known as The Shining.
So I have a tough debate. Which movie starts out with great helicopter film shooting techniques? Is it Sound of Music or this movie? And I almost say this movie really outdoes the helicopter filming sequences. Especially going almost on the highway and then getting off the highway. Almost like you're on the lake and then you're almost going to hit the island and then you veer off.
So as somebody who doesn't care much for the Sound of Music, I'm going to go with The Shining. Yeah. And the reason why I'll say that, though, is The Shining, not The Sound of Music, has had the footage reused. The helicopter footage was reused for the sequel 39 years later for Dr. Sleep. It was. And it was also, parts of it were taken for one of the cuts of Blade Runner. So this footage is so good, it's been used in other movies, both related to and unrelated. So I'm just going to say I'm going to side with The Shining, which is something a 15-year-old Kyle would not have done, is side with The Shining.
But it's interesting that even inside the car when they're driving, that's all in studio. That's a car. They carved out this door and they put the camera right on, and it's all fake, and the wind fan is blowing in, and then you get it's the old-fashioned filming of the trolling background when they're driving, but that. Yeah, because I don't think any of the actors are part of the whole helicopter scene. That is some dangerous stunts that they're doing.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. So the film is very well known in the movie world as being one of the premier classics of the horror genre, and a classic of Kubrick's entire filmography. It's also known because I think it's the only straight-laced one that he did. And then there's also, of course, the idea that it was mixed upon release. Many people were unhappy with the finished product. I have a quote from Gene Siskel here calling it a crashing disappointment. So the film was not very well liked, mostly from its creator, Stephen King, who said it was very much like what did he say? He said
it's good. He
said a fancy car without an engine.
But I think it's Kubrick doing Kubrick, right? Mm-hmm. And that we're not going to do that moving camera. We're going to set the camera and have the action be dynamic in front of us, almost like we're doing right here to set the camera. And then which is slow pacing for a horror movie, which you don't think is going to be effective. But you have to, because the movie goes so fast and the book takes a long time before the entities start taking over, before the craziness. And that's what King does. He takes his time for really the evolution change to set up, because we enjoyed Jack in the book in the first. He's a nice guy in the beginning. Danny likes him, everything, but you don't get that in the movie. But because it's fast in the movie, even though how long of a drawl.
Well, that's what's fascinating about it, is that The Shining it's 2 hours and 22 minutes, 2:25, something like that. This is a movie that, even on rewatch, does not feel like 2.5 hours. It cruises. No, I just watched it again this morning, and not only that, I watched it last month, and then I watched it 2 months prior to it as well, because my wife brings it up a lot. So I've actually sat and watched this movie 3 times in the last 6 months. I don't feel the length of it, and I'm not one of those guys that does rewatches that frequently. I'm more of like a once a year kind of a guy. But when you see that film multiple times, it does not stagger, it does not slow. It's a pretty fast-paced 2.5 hour movie. Yeah,
and then you built this set, so you have to show it off. I mean, it's a great set, so you have to take your time, and then almost in the background. Cinematographer is John Alcott. He also did cinematography for 2001. Barry Lyndon, and here he does cinematography again for Stanley Kubrick in this movie. He did a great movie. His last movie he shot was No Way Out in 1988 with Kevin Costner, which is a fantastic movie if you want to review that one as well, and then you get in memoriam of John Alcott. But he's one of those that I think just attached to Kubrick and just was on set and eventually got the job to, all right, you take it over.
Oh yeah, and we saw his work on Clockwork Orange as well with
Clockwork Orange as well.
like just that repetition that they have. And you can see, I think the strongest element of Kubrick's filmmaking is his cinematography. It's like the one stamp that I think he has across all of his films is that they're all like beautiful looking, but there's such a coldness to everything. And there's a literal coldness to The Shining, but all of his films have like an air of cold to them.
I agree.
And I think that's
a little more
that's
the
one of
cameras
those,
is distant.
yeah, like it kind of does feel like these are painted, depressing shots.
Right, because it doesn't move the camera very well. Even if he does, it's on a crane. I know they did the camera following Danny on a big wheel was mounted on a wheelchair, and then they had to move the wheelchair with Danny and then make sure it stood. I put brakes on it so when it stopped,
Yeah.
and so it didn't really move any well. So even when you have moving shots, you know, like in the kitchen and everything, it's not dynamic. Like you almost forget it's actually moving because we're just following the characters. Even with the close-ups, it seems very distant. And a lot of people have a lot of conspiracy theories about this movie. I didn't know about this until I researched like all these about like Danny, you know, was Kubrick filmed the moon landing or a lot of
thoughts about Native Americans because there's so many Native Americans pictured on food cans.
And the
all
room
around
is
the films.
the Navajo room or something like that. Yeah. And then the insult of Jack throwing the tennis ball at the Native American mural.
Oh yeah.
And it's supposed to be on Indian burial ground. So the movie implies that this is happening because you're disturbing native land.
Well, and that's the thing that's interesting is that watch the documentary Room 237 if you want 2 hours of just mind-bending conspiracy theory, because that's what the film is broken down into so many avenues. And it's a frustrating watch because I'm watching it for the story and like you're dissecting it to the point of like
over dissecting, like
torn asunder.
If you do we reconstructed the room the way they filmed it, then that's it's like, well, they built a set, please. They didn't build like intentionally incongruous like rooms that couldn't exist next to each other by the way it moves, and I'm like, I'm not sure that much thought went into designing the rooms. But there's also that thing too where everyone's like, well, they changed it from room 217 to 237 for this reason and that reason. I'm like, no, the hotel they were shooting at didn't want room 217 to be associated with the room, because there was a room 217 in that hotel that they were shooting, so they wanted to put it in 237. It's not that crazy. Or when the Danny's playing in the hallway and it looks like the carpet one take goes one way and the other way. It's just a different day of continuing. You know, continuation. You know, continuity always gets messed up.
I know that Kubrick was like a stickler for getting everything.
But some days you're just setting up and you're like, oh yeah, we filmed the wrong hallway. Well,
and I'm sure there were some areas that there was some intention, but I don't think there is as much as some people read into it. I think he was far more focused on the deteriorating mental faculties of Jack Torrance than he was about specific little things like that. But the moon landing one is specifically fun when you can watch the section on the moon landing.
For me, this overall story, you know, the mallets and ghosts and entities and all that stuff, it really, for me, it boils down to the history of alcoholism in the family. Because even in the book, Jack talks about his abusive alcoholic father. He doesn't want to be that way, no matter how hard it is. So it's almost a downfall. The book concentrates more on Jack than the movie does with Danny. Yeah. Because it's really, Jack, I don't want to do this, but the temptations and all this stuff of the enabling of the ghost and everything to basically go back to being an alcoholic. It's battles of alcoholism. I think even Stephen King had.
Well, yeah, Stephen King, I mean, he had been struggling with alcoholism at the time. I think he had quit by the time he was working on it. Of course, he got into drugs later on, so he had to deal with that as well. Yeah, but he said that there was a moment when his son had messed up his writing papers, and he literally said, at that moment, I wanted to take him and kill him. And he said, that's when I realized that I had gone too far, because I literally felt such a violent anger towards my son for messing up papers in my office. And that's exactly what happened to Jack in the past story of the film, too. So I think this is a more personal story for King, and I think that's why it hurts the most that it's not, that it wasn't adapted in the way that he liked. I struggled a lot with this adaptation, because growing up, I thought The Shining was really good. Kubrick's The Shining. Yeah. And then I got into Stephen King when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I started reading everything chronologically from when he'd written it. He wrote The Shining fairly early in his career. It was his third published novel.
I think I have to say a lot and Carrie.
Yeah, and so reading that, then I started to realize, wow, I love this book. I hate what this movie did to this book. And I had that for a great many years. I think this may be one of the worst adaptations of a book I've
that
ever
you
seen.
like.
And that may be just because I absolutely love it, but I think that there are a lot of elements where it's like I prefer the way things play out in the book from a story perspective to what happens in the film. I had to go as far as to rent and watch the 1997 miniseries, which is not a great movie, but it's a great adaptation.
I agree. There's a lot of things because it looks a little stiff.
Yeah.
Filmmaking.
So the 97 film, in fact, King actually had to go to the estate and try to get the rights back to make another adaptation because Kubrick's estate had the rights to it still. So he had to go to get the rights back from someone he didn't really like to get his own version made. So it's kind of that thing where the 80s film is a bad adaptation but a brilliant movie. The 97 miniseries is a bad miniseries but a great adaptation. So I had to get kind of to the idea where this is not King's The Shining. This is Kubrick's The Shining in my book. And now I can appreciate it for what it is.
And it's I rewatch this all the time because, like, why is this so effective filmmaking? Because, like, the scary part of, because when I was 5 and I saw this on TV, I saw The Exorcist and my parents said I laughed at it. I thought that kid was crazy. But then the kid on the bike, and then the Grady girl's down the hallway, and it stops, and I was like, that made me run out of the room frightened. And I go, why that's effective is the sound beats, the repetitions, and then them holding still, like we're establishing ground right here, and that you're like, oh my god, I don't want to play. And then the enticement of not so much like let's do horrific things, but let's have fun. And it's almost childlike, and you know that's not right. Even with me at 5, seeing that, I was like, that's not right.
And that particular scene showcases one thing that Kubrick has in common with the great horror and even comedy teams of the past, is that he has a tremendous understanding of timing. You can't do good scares without timing. You can't do good laughs without timing. And that's what he gets with that scene, is he knows just how long to push it. The sound design for that, where every time he's on the hardwood, you hear the and then he's on the soft, and then he's on the hardwood and the soft. And not to mention the fact, as you pointed out, having the wheelchair following him. So I'm not even sure how they were able to get it without the camera bumping. I know they use Steadicam, but still, it would have been. I feel like there should have been almost something in that grading to look like you're hitting it behind them. And then going as far, he goes just long enough to make you realize, like, well, nothing's going to happen. And then something happens. You get convinced that you're safe, and then something happens.
There's a lot of, like, the documentary Room 237 talks about, it's almost the film is about desecration of America, frontierism taking over and really stealing land from the Native Americans. Jack using an axe, which I don't think is in the book.
It's a giant croquet mallet in the book. There's
always a giant croquet. We talked about it before we started. It's always a giant croquet mallet because it's not a bat. It's a mallet that he goes up the steps for Wendy, and then he used the mallet on himself in the book. But here, I think Kubrick is trying to imply the American frontierism because the axe is very American weapon, and this is before the slasher movies of the '80s that Jack is using an axe to do his murdering. But there's also the tool of America, of frontierism, chopping down trees is the axe. So I think that's intentional why Kubrick, he wanted to use that as an axe. Well,
yeah, the '80s were full of stabbings.
Right,
just every horror movie had some guy with a knife, and even that's kind of parodied, satired, and homage with Scream in the '90s, was that the killer is carrying around a stabbing, cutting weapon. And I think that's what's kind of cool about The Shining as a book, is that it had a blunt object doing the damage. And there's just something about being hit really hard that's almost more terrifying than being stabbed. And I think that's kind of that, again, interesting dichotomy that they chose to do, is that, he's carrying around an axe in this film, and it has a purpose to Kubrick's vision.
Right. And also dualities, right? A lot of mirror shots. Cinematographers love to play with mirrors. If you hire one to do it, they always like, could we put a mirror somewhere? Because it's one of their ways of showing off how talented they are. But Kubrick is using mirrors as almost a dual imagery, dual identity, almost a reflection. And almost every time you see Jack in this movie, there's a mirror close by, or a reflection of him. It's almost like he's looking back. And then this movie implies that this Jack entity is a reincarnation that the ghosts are trying to get back. And when they doesn't go overall effective, they then want to go after Danny. I think that's what they're trying to do. That this is a reincarnation of Jack. Maybe they escaped him, and they're trying to retrieve him.
I've always taken it, because I'm assuming you're referring to this finale, of course.
Yeah.
With the picture. And I've always taken that to mean that
"You're always was."
I've always taken that to mean that the hotel consumes people, like you become part of the history when you arrive and die there. And I feel like and I think that's also what King's book hinted at, and what the sequel hinted at. So Kubrick's intention may have been different, but I've always read into it kind of similar to like the idea of like he wasn't in the picture when he arrived there.
Oh.
But he was pulled into the history of the hotel.
You
Much
can
like
play- yeah, I
Grady
like that
being
interpretation.
he was the caretaker who became the butler. And then I think there's even the hinting that the guy behind the bar, Lloyd
My
was
favorite
also part of, was also one of the guys that had shown up there and died and become part of the hotel. We even get a kind of a hinting at Mike Flanagan's intention with that by having Jack Torrance become the bartender in Dr. Sleep.
Right.
So there's a lot of that kind of I like the idea of it feeding off of you.
It feeds
and
on
feeding
you, rather,
you know?
yeah. And it can also, in my interpretation, that it's a reincarnation that Del
Oh yeah,
Grady,
that's
Charles
the other
Grady,
big one I read.
You've
about.
always been the person here, even though we've gone through. You started this all, where it's almost like a reincarnation.
Yeah, and I've had several
But
times
it's a
where I've tried
destiny,
to
right?
zoom in to see
Right.
if I
You
can
have that
get
picture.
that picture in the background. Maybe is he in there at that point?
Yeah.
But that's what I think is fascinating too. Is it's a movie that I always criticize ambiguity. Because I think most ambiguity in your ending means you couldn't come up with a good idea.
Oh.
I like ambiguity that gives me at least something to ponder and come up with my own answer that feels good to me. So I like the ending of Inception because I can decide what I believe.
You can go
I
either
like
way.
the ending of The Shining purely because you can believe a whole lot of different things, and it's so left open. This is a rarity of ambiguity endings that I actually really love.
Yeah. It's almost like, for me, if he was reincarnated, it was destined for him to come back.
Yeah.
Or if you, that it's destined for him to be part of this entity, and you just draw into this history.
Yeah, or maybe that the hotel wants to consume Danny for his ability, and using Jack for that. And again, that's a very Kingian interpretation. I think if you read the book and you still like the movie, that's what you breathe into that.
Because in the book, Jack does have one last attempt to doesn't he flush out the family before the boiler explodes?
Yeah.
Even
So
though
there's
he's
that,
beat-
and
yeah.
if you'll notice, watching Dr. Sleep's movie's ending is closer to Shining's book ending. And they actually get rid of the Dr. Sleep book ending and replace it with the new ending. And that's one of the things that frustrated me about Dr. Sleep was, again, I really like the ending of Dr. Sleep and what it says about Danny's character as an adult and how he is different than his father.
Trying to overcome his alcoholism because it's hereditary. It's almost like,
And that's kind of the frustrating thing about it. It's there's a lot of elements that are really at work here. But again, I am just one of those guys that loves that book so much. And I've read the book so many times now that it's become part of who I am as a storyteller and a reader. But again, looking at the film as it stands, I like that there's multiple interpretations of Jack. Was he always crazy? Is there any ghosts in the actual hotel, or is it just cabin fever?
Right, and I think that's supposed to be his You're supposed to be make up your mind. Almost.
Yeah. There's another thing I want to ask too, because this part still kind of boggles me a bit. The title cards, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah.
Are we meant to assume that a week has passed? Or
a month? Or
what is the Tuesday? Because it makes it seem like we're here for maybe a couple of days.
You're right to bring it up because the beginning it says closing day, and that's the title of one of the chapters in the book.
Yeah.
So I thought, we're going to continue, and if you remember, it's that's what I first time watched. We're going to use the title cards of the chapters of the book.
Yeah.
But no, then we're just going durations of day. But it's almost like in the Lighthouse. Tuesday. What Tuesday? Is it a month?
Yeah, is it meant to evoke kind of that the passage of time is ultimately meaningless? Like they don't know how much time has passed?
Well, we use that in film theory that time is so elusive. It can be stagnated. It can be duration. You can't tell. Like in Deer Hunter, all the things that take place in 24 hours. The first hour of the movie. So
yeah.
I think it's supposed to make you a little more discombobulated because it's supposed to be there for 3 months, right?
Yeah, or is it a Tuesday and then 3 months later Wednesday? What is because there's a level of you can look at the 237 documentary and you can read into things that are unintentional. There's no way you can say that making a title card was an unintentional choice. He chose to have the title card and he chose to have it say
Put it
that.
in there, right? Yeah.
He went out of his way to do it, and I think that's where people get the confusion about how much intention he did. He intended to put title cards in the movie. There's no way about it. You don't accidentally crap, I put the Tuesday in.
Right.
You don't do that.
And I think the title cards would have been titles of the chapters of the book.
Yeah, and then they went out of their way, of course, with Dr. Sleep to put chapters in as well. Kind of in the director's cut of that film, they've got chapter titles, and I think that's really it's a captivating way to kind of show the passage of time in a unique fashion.
King is very effective in using a mixture of entity and force. I think every story written, there's an entity, a place that is encapsulated or trapped in them, but also a force is driving it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And usually movies do one or the other. And here, this is another of entity and force kind of battling each other out almost, or in cahoots with each other.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of almost double dynamite for horror movies.
Yep.
You get both of them.
Well, and I think that's what I find very effective about King is that I'm someone who I appreciate a good monster movie. Like I like the creepy things that are living in the forest or living under your bed. I like cool creature design and that kind of stuff. But I like that he usually ties his monster with his human. You know, there's always a human villain and a kind of psychological, paranormal kind of a creature effect too. And I think that's what I like about his writing is that he has these two elements at play. So when people tell me they don't think there was anything paranormal at the hotel, I tend to think, Wendy sees all that stuff at the end of the film. Is she that broken by her interaction with Jack that she's seeing dead bodies? Maybe. Right. But I also think that as a parent, when you see that danger coming at you, I think that would push her to be trying to save her son more. I don't think she'd be seeing all these things, not to mention seeing them in the same way that Jack saw them.
And there's a little more the dashes of comedy in it because how Jack dies is kind of funny.
Yeah,
to see. It's almost like
that cut, that smash cut to it.
Yeah,
is really like it's unnerving, and it reminds me of what I bring up a lot with like that Joaquin Phoenix Joker effect, where it's like I'm laughing at something I shouldn't be laughing at, and you feel bad for laughing at it, And I think again that comes down to that effective comedy horror element.
Yeah, and there's that a little bit. You're supposed to. I think you intentionally supposed to laugh at what happened to Jack. Stupid.
Yeah, and it's curious to me that, again, bringing up the idea of the hedge maze is a completely fabricated idea from Kubrick. There is no hedge maze in the book. There are hedge animals that at one point come to life, but there's no hedge maze in the book. And
that's a great shot of Jack looking over the maze as the model set, but then he's almost looking down at his own family.
Yeah, it's a great use of visual effects that you don't often see with Kubrick because he was like everything was done in camera usually, and so the way that he worked out actually having to shoot them walking down there from high above and actually expositing it into the frame, it's fascinating. That shot is probably the best shot in the movie.
I think Kubrick finally realized at this movie that you needed really good music to emphasize what you're shooting, and the music really does effective work. It's almost like a swelling coming out of you. It's almost like something is about to merge. It's almost like what they use for the Harvey Dent, that boom. Yeah, it's about ready to. It's like a volcano almost about to ready to erupt. But it's also like the keys, do do do. It's almost always foreboding.
Yep.
With the music,
I would liken it to Jaws and Halloween, where it's like 5 notes that are just being used, and it's so effective that, of course, it was reused in Dr. Sleep, but it's so effective that when you hear it, there's that moment in Ready Player One, Steven Spielberg's film, where they realize that they have to go and do something involved with The Shining, and before they tell you that specifically, you hear the and it like every time I watch it in that film, I get chills. And it's not even the movie. It's another film using that score.
But even when you effective film that's like this shooting in the scenes where it seemed very benign, but you play the music, like something's not right, and that's very effective. So, of course, have you seen it?
Yeah, let us know your thoughts on The Shining. Do you like the book better? Do you like the movie better? Do you like Dr. Sleep?
I trap myself.
Like
if I watch the movie, I'm watching a movie, and if I go back to rereading the book for the third time, I understand I'm reading a book, and I understand the journeys. It's a far more slow. Yeah,
I will forever call it Stanley Kubrick's The Shining and Stephen King's The Shining because there's just no way to get around it. No. I think of them as two completely separate stories. Yeah. Have you checked out our other episode on Dr. Sleep? It was our second episode of the show, so it's way back when, and you'll see some cards available for that up above. But until that time, make sure that you let us know your thoughts on The Shining. We know it's a horror classic, but I know a couple people that absolutely loathe the movie, so I'd like to know if you're one of them.
There was a period in my life where I watched it every day for a month. So,
and while you're down there, don't forget to like, subscribe, check out that Patreon that Nick mentioned before, and once again, you can find all my film reviews at goatfilmreviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, and I got to do it. All work and no play
makes Jack a dull boy.